Good afternoon. My name is Natalie Curry. I'm the General Manager of Supply Chains here at the ARA, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. For me, based in Canberra, it's the Ngunnawal people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to our second webinar as part of the ARA Women in Rail Conversation series. This one's titled Overcoming Barriers. The ARA webinar series is brought to you by our sponsor, Frauscher. So thank you, Frauscher. This special series really aims to create more conversations about diversity, championing women in the rail industry and fostering a culture that really drives real change. ARA's Gender Diversity Survey data published earlier this year revealed that we are seeing an increase in the representation of women in rail, albeit slowly. It reflects a real commitment, though, from ARA members to build gender diversity in rail. However, many women still face barriers to develop their career in rail, and we've got significant room for improvement. In today's webinar, we're really going to look at unpacking some of those barriers that exist in the rail workforce and learn some practical tips and insights from our esteemed panellists. So today's session is live and interactive. I really encourage you to participate online. You'll see a control panel on the right-hand side of your browser that looks like the screenshot show. You'll have the opportunity to submit your questions to today's panelists by typing your questions into the question pane of the control panel anytime during the conversation. And I will attempt to include your questions as part of the discussion. If you would like to direct your questions to a specific speaker, please also specify this. And let me now introduce our panelists. Ilan Sagi is the Head of Engineering and Value Creation for the Inland Rail Program, accountable for the functions of engineering management, technical assurance, digital engineering and innovation. Over the past 2 decades, Ilan has worked in several leadership roles in the Australian rail industry for both consulting and client-side organisations. Ilan is passionate about freight in rail in Australia and its important role in supporting a safer and more sustainable society and the opportunities presented by the current digital revolution to transform this industry. Ilan has served as a mentor under the Women in Rail Mentoring Program in 2019 and 2020. We also have with us Natalie Roach. Natalie is the Group Executive for Customer and Corporate Affairs in Queensland Rail. Natalie is an accomplished senior executive leader with more than 20 years experience in driving strategic change, transformation and customer experience improvements in the global aviation and travel industries. In her current role, Natalie champions a customer-focused strategy and culture across Queensland Rail and is responsible for organisational functions, including customer experience, accessibility, corporate and government affairs. Natalie is also a mentor under the Women in Rail Mentoring Program in 2019 and 2020. And thirdly, we have with us Claire Pearce. Claire is the Executive Commercial Leader for Australian and New Zealand at GE Transportation, a Wabtec company with 20 years in the Wabtec Corporation. In addition to running her own consulting practice, Claire has worked in roles driving significant and impactful change, including in the areas of sales, customer experience, marketing excellence, business integrations, due diligence, and new business startups. And Claire's joined the transportation business in 2012. Concurrently, Claire also led the GE Australia and New Zealand Women's Network Leadership Team and to achieve the WGEA Employer of Choice citation for the General Electric Group of companies in Australia. In 2017, Claire was appointed to the role of Executive Commercial Leader for Australia and New Zealand, and Claire continues to be an active supporter of the Women of Wabtec Global Affinity Group. In 2020, Claire was appointed as Deputy Chair of the ARA Women in Rail Advisory Committee. I think you'll agree that these people are well experienced to talk to us today. So shall we kick off the discussion? Let's open it up on the topic of addressing barriers. So given championing gender diversity in rail often means addressing barriers, I really want to start by asking each of you, what do you see the main barriers that there are for females in the rail industry? How do we go about addressing them? That might be as an individual or an organisation or an industry. And if you could provide maybe some lessons learned or experiences of your own, that would be great. So Claire, do you want to kick us off?
Sure thing. Thanks very much, Nat. I guess in terms of main barriers for people seeking a career in rail, it's really something for everyone, and that's about awareness, not just males or females, but it's really about what is rail, what can people do in rail. And we then end up seeing, because a lot of people come into rail through fairly technical streams, that because those technical streams are made up with mostly males rather than females, you see a smaller flow coming into the industry generally. And so I think those entry points make it a little bit challenging. What we have seen in terms of some people who've been really successful, for example, at changing some of that, are some of our bigger organisations in the rail space. I certainly think of Horizon when I think of that, and familiar with a number of the programs they put in place to bring women into more operational roles and so forth from areas that have perhaps been traditionally more female-led, so HR, marketing, some of the more traditional areas you think of, as opposed to, say, signalling engineering. So those things I think have been successful in the past. Other barriers, though, apart from the way we enter and then how we might migrate people through, and particularly females, into rail and into bigger and more important roles within the rail industry, there's a number of the ways in which we work. So a lot of rail is very operational, hands-on. It can be out there driving a train, it can be manufacturing, it can be servicing components. And those particular job types make it quite difficult to have companies to think about how we might provide much more flexibility in the way people work, because often they're required to be there on site. But there are things we can do there too, for example, Nat, and it's things like, rostering. Can you shift your rosters? How do we do that? And again, another really good example from Horizon, who was a customer I supported previously, and saw them change some of the rostering, mostly to encourage females, and so moved it to an earlier shift start so that group could finish in time to go collect children from school. Great idea. And the really interesting thing was that they had the majority of people taking that up were actually men, because they too wanted to do it. So that brings us back to, what's good for one is also good for the other. It's about the roles that we all play and allowing that flexibility to everyone, which supports both males and females and allows for that greater level of diversity, regardless of what your interests are or whether you've got children or the like, and what your role is in terms of supporting things outside of the work environment. So there are a couple of the big ones I'd see initially. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. Elan, jump in. What is it from your perspective? Elan, are you on mute?
It off.
There we go.
I 100% agree with Claire there when we see it across the industry. And I think my personal observation that the rail in general is an industry that typically struggle with change. And what we see in the low gender diversity, or the low diversity in general in some area, is just a result of that. And I think we need to work on our culture, on how we think, or on how we behave and how we are perceived, both internally and externally, in order to overcome that barrier. And there's different ways that we can do that. But what we're talking about is really we need to transform, like Claire demonstrated there, some of our culture and our practices if we want to achieve step change. And we need to start looking at change as an opportunity rather than a risk. It's been so installed in us because we're a very safety-driven organization that change is bad and risk is something that needs to be mitigated, and we're missing out some opportunity. And so as an industry, we need to continue to develop our long-term vision and our goals, and we need to accept that we'll be something different by the time we get there. And what I observed in my time in the rail industry, that we seem to be very sentimental towards the way things were, and perhaps that's holding us back. Or more of an organization level, we need to continue on our journey to develop and embrace all those sorts of adaptable, flexible, and inclusive work cultures that are suitable for the life we live in 2020. I think there's a lot of perceptions there to still the nuclear family, and then one parent is working, and the involvement of family and raising kids with a village, or there seems to be a lot of focus on the how do we solve the problem for one type, when we know that diversity is about, we are all different. And work on that work-life balance and trying to my experience trying to raise a family in this modern age is it's a complex juggling act of synchronizing calendars, and having a successful career should not be a sacrifice of what you want to achieve in life outside of that. And also, we need to at the same time as individual to stop pretending that we can do it all the time. And I'm focused on all the time because we seem to look at careers, and this is maybe more in the corporate world, as something that has a commonly increasing rate, or you constantly move up and up and up. And I think as an organization design, we don't do enough to try and remove the stigma around things like that we have in the workplace already, such as job sharing, or to think of how we can also embrace other things, such as have deputy type roles, means to share loads and split accountabilities, and introduce or reintroduce, because it used to be quite common 20, 30, 40 years ago, some rotational roles and secondments as mean to develop our staff and offer some more flexibility, and to acknowledge, and this is not just for female, this is for males or individuals, that when you decide to have a family, or when you decide to pursue other things rather than your career, then it's okay to take a bit of a break, or to go and do something else, and to slow down for a while, and being able to come back at it from and look at things from a different angle and have more experience. As an individual, in general, we need to be far more comfortable at seeking, considering, and understanding different approaches, particularly if you're a male, and particularly if you're in this industry for more than 20 years. You should be, listen, it's not about the female in the industry doing anything different. It's about the industry really starting to embrace change.
Wow, there's a lot there to tackle, isn't there? Natalie, do you want to add some more?
Yeah, sure. Look, I totally agree with what Claire and Ilan have had to say. And actually, I want to pick up on the point that Ilan made around the reputation of the rail industry, because I think, perception is reality. And the fact of the matter is that there is a lot of cynicism out there about the rail industry. So for those of us that work in rail, the reality is that, we know that hundreds of thousands of customers each day, be they freight customers or passenger customers, travel successfully on the rail network. They have uncomplicated, really successful journeys. And we know that rail contributes hugely to the economy at both the state and the federal level. I think, though, if you ask the average man on the street, the reputation and perception of rail is somewhat different to that. And people often think of it as behind the times, as Ilan said, very male dominated, a lot of the sort of, without being rude, sort of the pale male stealth type of reputation. And I think the industry reputation has also been sort of tarnished a little bit by some performance issues in the past, be it timetabling issues, operational performance, operational challenges. So I think for me, there's a real opportunity here for rail as a whole to focus on its brand. And that's obviously for attracting both males and females. But I think particularly, we need to focus on promoting the complexity of the industry. So again, for the man on the street, and if I think about my perceptions of rail before I joined QR 3 years ago, I was surprised when I joined QR to understand actually how complex rail is. And if you think about it from the man on the street's perspective, or the lady on the street's perspective, given we're talking about diversity and inclusion, it's a train, it runs on 2 rails, it has signals. How hard can it be? And it's only when you start to really unpack it that you get a real appreciation for the levels of complexity and the types and nature of roles right across this fantastic industry. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to promote the opportunities, the complexity, and really open up to people from all backgrounds and all skills levels, and just be much more proactive and modern in the way we recruit. And if I think about some work that we've done here at QR, our people team have worked with our comms team and done a fantastic job at looking at just that. How are we actually recruiting? Our job adverts were written by men for men, and some of them have kind of been around in terms of job descriptions for 20 plus years. The world has changed. We're in a different place. It's not Monday to Friday kind of 8 till 5 in the corporate sector anymore. We've got all these different roles that are out there, different skill sets, digital technology. So how do we make it more attractive for those young and upcoming people, and particularly women, to join what has traditionally been a female industry? And I think for me as well, the key piece for all of us at an individual level is that we have to be the change we want to see. So one of the things for me that I'm really passionate about is supporting initiatives such as our QR Women programme, which is really helping to empower and enable women within Queensland Rail, and similarly our Diversity and Inclusion Council, because obviously it's not just a gender issue. We actually need to attract people from diverse backgrounds to rail more broadly.
Absolutely. Such helpful insights there, everyone. Thank you so much. And you sort of said a role for everyone. And Ilan, I'm really keen to get your insights from you as a male is this Women in Rail conversation. Particularly, you were a mentor of ours in the ARA's Women in Rail mentoring program. And I'm really keen to hear from you from insights as a male mentoring women in through the program.
I'm very passionate about this program. I think it's been fantastic. I get a lot of it as a mentor. Selling my mentee, I'll probably get more of it than what they do, because it really offered me a different perspective. And I think by design, the mentoring program is sort of create an opportunity for me to sit and listen to the challenges faced by females in the industry. And by definition, he asks you, and I think this program in particular, has got a lot of guidance for mentors as well, about how to do it and how to become a better mentor. And I think what they talk about in essence is about offering support and perspective rather than solutions and advice. And for me personally, at times it's against my instinct. I want to go and fix things, and at times it's against my nature. My partner Kirsty define those moments when they happen at home as like suffering from the action man syndrome, that want to always to come in and rescue, whether it's required or not. And I think participating in this program helped me particularly to understand better, those unconscious biases that I have, my blind spot, and be more self-aware to gender equality issues in the workplace. And hopefully, like Natalie or Nat rightly said, is really demonstrate that change from within. It's an absolutely fantastic journey, and I encourage all males in the rail industry, particularly if they've been in the industry for more than 20 years, to take the time and spend more time listening and not focusing just on the solution, but actually bringing other people to give the perspective and asking them what should we do different, how can we change.
Yeah. And Nat, you are also a mentor in our program, and no doubt have been mentors in other programs as well. Really keen to get your insight into how mentoring really helps to overcome some of these barriers we've discussed.
Look, I think Nat, mentoring is absolutely critical in helping people to address barriers. I think, it provides a safe environment where people can talk freely, and where obviously the mentee can set the agenda and talk about the matters that are important to them themselves. I think for me, it really helps the mentee work through any issues that they have, and it helps them to develop strategies for dealing with those issues. So obviously, if that's barriers, then it's a great opportunity for talking those through, equipping your mentee with some confidence, and also helping them, I think, empower themselves to take action, whether that action is to have a conversation or just to think differently about things. It's a great opportunity to provide that really safe zone for people to explore things that perhaps they're uncomfortable talking about in different settings. And having been, a mentor, but also having been a mentee previously, I think one of the biggest advantages is actually that opportunity for the mentee to have someone that they can draw on, that will provide them sort of sound guidance and objectivity, but will also challenge their thinking. So they'll ask that difficult question and just push them a little bit in terms of their comfort zone, so that they can work through to a solution that works. I have to say, having been part of the program with the ARA and other mentoring programs, it's one of the things that I really enjoy the most about my role, is helping others to work through some of those challenges. It's really fulfilling at a personal level, and it's really great to watch the mentees that I've worked with actually progress and develop themselves.
That's great. It's great to hear that it's such a benefit for mentors as well as mentees. Absolutely. Also, just want to pause and do a shout out to our participants. I haven't received any questions, and I expect to be flooded with questions. Here's an opportunity to pick these people's brains. So jot them through on the question pane, and we will endeavour to answer them in our discussion today. Claire, perhaps we could talk a bit more about stereotyping and unconscious bias. I mean, these are big topics, but we received a lot of comments and quotes and questions at our first Women in Rail conversation about this. And I'm really keen to sort of say, where do we start tackling these challenging, these big challenges? Yeah.
Look, they are big challenges, but they're also, look, I think we also need to level set right at the beginning that stereotyping is a normal, natural function that the brain does just to help us get through the day successfully, right? There's just so much new information that's constantly being bombarded on everyone. You wouldn't be able to get yourself out the door in the mornings if you didn't have some of these, you know, brain processes working that go, oh, I know this and I know that, and this is how this functions based on past history. So I think it's really important for us to realise that that is in fact the case, and that's okay, right? These things are there, that's okay. And that, I think, helps take some of the heat out when we start thinking about certain situations. Oh, when I was treated this way, or I was thought about in that manner. I think we just have to understand where it's come from. It's not necessarily come from someone trying to specifically do something negative toward you, as an example, or to colleagues. So that's really the first one, I guess. And so there's biases, and Alana and I were talking earlier, and it's really unconscious biases. Are they almost moving towards more conscious biases? It's about us actually having that awareness of how we're creating those boxes, what sandboxes we're putting people and situations into, or what sorts of prior experiences we might have had that have us think about things in a certain way. And it's starting to bring that to the forefront of our awareness, right? So it's really about how we as individuals can manage through our own thought processes, our own thinking, and what we're bringing to particular situations, and really have much more deliberate awareness around what we're doing. So I guess a couple of examples that I could bring to mind of things where I've watched this in other situations, one to a colleague and one to myself, and it just helps us think a little bit around some of those stereotypes. And one was much earlier in my career, working with a particular manager who was looking to fill a role, and it was a critical role in his part of the organisation. And there was a female employee who was currently acting in that position. And he'd come into the leadership meeting, he'd said, you know, he was really struggling to find a suitable candidate to fill the role. And so I was a bit confused, because I said, well, let's call this person Amy to keep the innocence there. But Amy, I thought Amy was doing a great job. We heard really good things, and certainly my team have experienced, you know, good output. He said, yes, I only hear good things, but I'm just not sure. Why aren't you sure? Well, I don't believe she's committed to the role. Oh, okay, and asked, why is that? Well, because, you know, every time I look up, at the minute it's past 5 o'clock, she's gone. She's not there anymore. Okay, right. So then I was able to understand what all this issue was about. It was about, you know, this thought and this bias of, if you're not seen in the office into the wee, you know, late hours of the evening, then you're not really a good team player. You're not part of it all. And yet the actual fact was, I said, well, you know, and I'll call him Paul, that wasn't his name, but, you know, Paul, I noticed you come into the office just before 9 each morning, and I'm here typically at 7 a.m. and Amy's here every day before me. I have no idea what time she gets in, but she's here at very early. I think she's getting all the work done anyway. And I do know that her cultural expectation is that she's to have the dinner on the table for her husband when he walks in the door every evening. So just a little thing to be aware of. Maybe you could reconsider whether she might be the right person for the role. And he did, and she was very successful. But it was just through some of those biases that he had naturally, you know, that she wasn't automatically made, you know, permanent in that position. And so in that instance, I think it's really important that we have enough trust and care and concern for our colleagues that we're willing to point out these examples and allow people to perhaps take a pause and think a little bit differently about, you know, the logic and the direction that their thinking is going down. Another example I'd give from, yes, my personal experiences, I was looking to be promoted to a particular role in my career, and I had great support from a lot of people around, which was wonderful. And my hiring manager told me a year after I'd been put in the role that, oh, just by the way, giving you sort of a review of how things have gone in the first 12 months. Look, everything's, you know, great, blah, blah, blah. Here's some things we can work on, etc. He said, oh, and by the way, one of the other key leaders who I had seen as being an incredible supporter of gender diversity and diversity in general in our organisation, really amazing role model style leader. So I was a bit surprised when my hiring manager told me that, and I just wanted to let you know that I never felt the impact of you having younger children on that role. And that was an issue that was raised to me that I should be considering when I was looking to put you in the role in the first place by this other particular manager that I thought was incredibly supportive of creating more diversity in the organisation. So that was a really good pause moment for me to go, you know what, even though we are all trying to do the right thing, and I absolutely believe that, you know, both my hiring manager and this other key leader were wanting to do absolutely the right thing by everyone in our organisation, we still all are constrained often by some of our own biases, right? Now, that particular leading manager, you know, was in a sort of very lucky position, I could say, where his wife was able to stay at home, raise the children, and comes from that background. Whereas I know I have certain biases wherein when I see a female who's going for a role, and I have to think about this and make sure I've got other people reviewing as well, so this bias doesn't come into play too much. Where she's got younger children or had younger children, I actually have a bias that says, I know she's the kind of person that can be really organised and get things done. Now, I don't actually know that. That's just something that's sitting in the back of my mind as some experiences that I may have had with myself or perhaps one or two others. But it's not a generic truism for everyone else out there. So I have to also stop myself from having these thought processes, as I'm going to say, going through a recruitment process. So I think it's really, really important for us all to understand that, look, the biases are there, the stereotypes are there. They are there ultimately because of our experiences and because we need to get through the day. But how do we really stop and think and start to unpack and understand our own biases and the way we stereotype and think about people and try to help compensate for that? And then how do we help those peers around us, those people who work for us, work with us, work above us? How do we help in a constructive way? Help them see and give them a little bit more perspective if you might see something that they are doing too that's having them drive in a certain direction just due to some of these biases, stereotypes that they might not even be aware of, right? So it's not at all about a negative approach or a blame approach. It's just about how do we all get wiser together. Right?
Yeah. We all need to do bias checks. That's really helpful, Claire. Thank you so much for sharing those personal experiences. We've got questions coming in thick and fast now that I've given that extra prompt. And you've kind of answered the first one already, Claire. This one was about senior leaders in the rail industry. Do the challenges of gender diversity change in the more senior positions you have? And you've sort of given some great examples. Natalie, do you want to jump in and provide any of your own?
Yeah, so look, I think the challenge of gender diversity applies right across all levels of organisations. And, you know, I can think of a specific example 4 weeks into my career in the rail industry, which will probably stay with me for the rest of my life, where I attended a meeting on behalf of our CEO. And at the meeting, the chair of the meeting was doing the introductions and introduced me and said, "This is Natalie Roach from Queensland Rail. It's great to have her here today because we did say we'd get more women around the table." And I was just floored because for me, I'd much rather not be in that meeting if I'm there because I'm female. I want to be around the table because of what I bring to the party, not because of the fact that I'm a female in the rail industry. So there are certainly challenges. And I know another occasion whereby I was at an industry event and the CEO of an organisation said to me that he asked me if I was our CEO's executive assistant. And when I asked him why, his response was, because I saved the boss a seat. And I'm not sure how some of this computes, but it just shows that these issues are out there. But these issues aren't unique to rail. For example, one of my team, a female senior leader, went to a media event offsite and was asked by a broadcasting agency, who I won't name, whether she was the CEO's wife, because she couldn't possibly be the senior media and government affairs, for example. So there are challenges, but I think with the challenges that come with diversity and inclusion, there actually becomes more progress into the senior leadership ranks. Because if I go back to one of the points that I made early on, to be the change you want to see, you have more of an opportunity to drive that change and control the agenda. So for me, for example, I was one of the founding co-executive sponsors of our Queensland Rail Women Programme, which I mentioned, which is about enabling and empowering women. I'm an executive sponsor of our Diversity and Inclusion Council, so you really get the opportunity to drive that agenda in your organisation. And if you think about it, it's a real opportunity to set the tone and set, because what interests your boss interests you. So if you're working in an organisation where you're having an executive team or a board or senior leaders that are really passionate about diversity and inclusion, with that comes huge amounts of opportunity to actually make some really, really meaningful change and really deliver some achievements and wins in the D&I space.
Absolutely. Elon, I'm really keen to get your perception in terms of the role that males play in supporting diversity within organisations and for you supporting your female colleagues.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I say I'll keep pushing the same point across, that we should push for diversity and change to the industry. And I think by focusing on doing a true transformation and going from a caterpillar to a butterfly, not just a caterpillar with wings, this is what we need to do that. And this is the long-term approach to do that. And we got a lot of work, and it's going to take 20 years to get where we want. What we need to do in the interim, though, is to keep designing our organization to what we're currently doing, and keep checking in, keep looking at how we're going, challenging ourselves, how can we do better. I think to reflect more to my role within an engineering organization, we have a supply issue that there's not a lot that we can do about it in the short term. And what I'm particularly passionate about is to make sure that we don't see those common trends of retention problems, which we do manage to get some fantastic bright minds into the industry, and they're coming here and they give up on us, and we're seeing that just too often. And I think by rebranding ourselves, we talked about before, it's a fantastic industry to be in. It's far more complex than people understand. There is so many different roles and so many different facets in there, and there is a room for everyone, and it's just going to better our industry. So let's use this current unprecedented investment in rail to really come out the other end as a different industry.
Yeah, and it leads into another question we've received around retention once we've attracted females to the industry. And the comment along with it is rail's not unique, and we know that there's other industries out there that suffer or have the same challenges. And Natalie, you've got a range of past experiences from other industries, both private, public companies. I'm really keen to get your insights from, are they different challenges, the type of organisations, and what are some of the lessons learned that you can provide from other industry perspectives?
Yeah, sure, Nat. So look, I think if I'm honest, I think the challenges are the same regardless of whether you work in the private sector or the public sector. I think what's different is the extent of those challenges. So I think the type of challenges are probably pretty consistent, but the extent of those challenges varies somewhat. And as I said about before, it's really kind of within the gift of the senior leadership of the organisations to try and, really focus on and drive change in terms of those challenges, because they can really play a leading role in the culture of the organisation. Claire and Ilan have touched on, flexibility. How do we work? When do we work? And moving away from that historic kind of requirement that, you weren't a performer unless you're still in the office at 6:30 at night or at your desk at 7:30. So I think actually with COVID, there's come a lot of opportunity and a lot of benefit, because COVID has shown us that we can all work flexibly And actually our organisations continue to perform, and they continue to perform well. And we've seen that shift in well-being for people as well. They have more control of their lives. They feel more control of their own well-being. So I think there's some great opportunities coming. But I think, you know, the challenges are there, and we have to be really open about them. So I'm a real firm believer in kind of education and communication, and then also metrics. So, you know, educate people on the challenges that are out there from a diversity perspective, be that gender diversity, be it disability, whatever it might be. You know, we have to communicate those challenges, be open about them, tell the story. And particularly if we think around, you know, a previous experience of mine, I remember aviation career when I was asked to participate in a women's development program. And my boss at the time said to me, well, I'm a man, I haven't been invited. What about all the men? And to try and avoid that perception that men are being kind of penalised is to really educate on the why, tell that story and really gain that buy-in. And then the other important piece, as Ilan touched on as well, is around the metrics. So how are we actually tracking and measuring performance in this area? And so there's lots of great work going on around participation in the rail industry, participation in organisations, you know, participation at management level, senior management level, at ELT and on boards. And I think it's really, really important to actually be open about that and look at where are we doing well and where can we do better. And again, the same applies to other areas of diversity too. And I think the other piece and a tool that can be really useful, and it comes back to a topic that I think both Ilan and Claire touched on around retention, is when people are leaving, it's a really useful process to have and it doesn't have to be a formal exit interview, but I think it's important to sit down and chat with people to understand the why and what's driving them to leave. Because I know certainly from our experience at QR, historically, we have higher turnover in females than we do males. So what is it that we aren't doing to support our female workforce to make them want to stay? So I think there's lots of things that we can be doing.
That's really helpful. Another question that's come through is asking about an engineering degree. Is not having one a career blocker for females? Their perception is that you kind of need an engineering degree in rail to succeed as a female, but less so as a male. Any sort of views on that? Claire's got her hand up. I was going to go to you first anyway, Claire.
I have an engineering degree, just saying. Very interested in how everything works, but no formal engineering degree on my side. So, and I've got other, I've seen other very successful women and men working in the rail industry who don't come from that purest technical background. Now, certainly they're not going to be the individuals that you're going to have putting together and designing your new locomotive, but there are, and I mentioned, so many other different roles that are available in the rail industry, and maybe they'd be a fantastic salesperson to sell that particular locomotive or train set. Maybe they'd be really great in terms of rostering staff to run the railway. Maybe they'd be fantastic in terms of, you know, strategies to grow the industry that much more again. I mean, there's just so many different ways. And I think once you've also gotten to a certain level within an organisation, you're no longer relying on your core formal education to be a key contributor in that role, right? It's so much more than that. Yes, you need to have some form of expertise that you're always bringing, but then it's so much more about the way you're managing, the way you understand the commercials, the way that you can bring forth and get actions to occur down a particular path to reach the end strategic objectives of your organisation. So I've not seen it as being a huge impasse in terms of you must have a particular engineering degree, but I can also understand that there may have been thinking historically in some organisations that without that engineering degree, perhaps you could not progress. So I'd open it up to our other panellists to see what they've experienced in their careers there too.
I might jump in here, Claire. So like Claire, I didn't study engineering either. I studied languages, European languages and business, so nothing to do with anything of an engineering nature. And, you know, I've spent my last 20 years of my career in male-dominated environments in both aviation and now rail. So I certainly don't think not having an engineering degree is a blocker. Obviously, it's important for some roles, but not for others. And there are such a huge range of roles and opportunities in rail that there really is something for everybody. So I certainly shouldn't see that as a major blocker. And I think we need to be more proactive in communicating that to people and really sharing that, you know, there are roles pretty much for everybody, no matter what your skill set is, there's pretty much something you can do. And, you know, as Claire said, as you grow through your career and progress, it's less about your technical expertise and more about your broader experience and skill set, the leadership experiences that you have, the commercial experience that you have. So would encourage anybody that's interested in transport to get stuck in, because there are great opportunities for everybody.
What a plug, Nat. That's great. On the theme of career progression, Elan, you mentioned before about taking a pause. Now, this question has come through saying, I always thought it was risky to take a break in a career because it's difficult to get back on track. So really keen to get your views on that.
I don't know, I'm about to try it. So yeah, I'll be finishing soon and taking a couple of months off. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that's maybe a stigma, and we're dealing with a lot of stigma in the rail industry in particular. There's throughout my career and throughout my wife's, so sort of my partner Kirsty's career, we try and manage that. That life is a great juggling act, and particularly the higher you get into the organization, there is an element of burnout. There is an element of needing to every now and again put more effort on family or put more efforts on hobbies or develop yourself. We can't just continue at that particular rate. And I don't think in a couple of months' time, when after I had a bit of a long break and I tried to think about what next, I don't see that. I think, you know, it's how you pitch it. I'm saying I've done something. I got to a certain point. I took a pause, and now I'm ready for the next challenge. I would love some more time to read some books and adventure myself or do some training. And I think as the career progresses for both males and females in any discipline, it's important to sometimes, you know, change the rate, and it makes you a more rounded professional. And when you get to those executive positions that do require 100% of your attention and 70 hours a week, that you have the energy and you have the bandwidth to do that.
Yeah.
I would agree with the last. Sorry, Natalie, I was just going to say I took a break from my career as well by choice. When my children were very young, I had the opportunity. I could take a redundancy. I could continue on in a different role. And, you know, I took that time and then ended up moving into, you know, doing consulting work for a while, and then ultimately came back. And yeah, it does, to Alan's point, give you that much more energy and just gives you a different perspective again. And you can think about things in different ways. And that's where, again, you can add more value to your next role and your next employer and so forth. So I've not necessarily seen taking that time out to have been a negative in my career either.
That's great. And often the pause can be a little bit of a luxury, or we have a supporting partner. What about those sole parents out there? Now, there was a question that's come through about how can we approach management as women, as a woman who's a sole parent, regarding potential inability to sort of meet those deadlines and support that sort of juggling, appearing as sort of a liability with outside responsibilities and no shared workload. So thoughts and perspectives on that?
I'm happy to jump in because I'm working from the home office here today, as you can see. I'm a single mum with 2 kids who I have shared care arrangements for. So thankfully the shared care does give me a little bit more time in my role. I typically do need to travel, and so I can get that travel in and that alternate week. But, you know, I'm able to, because we have an approach in our organisation that supports flexible work. I can work from home on the weeks that I have my children. I can go and pick them up from school. And, you know, I can therefore, because of that, still manage the workload, but without having to spend a couple of hours driving each day to the office in those weeks, because that's just 2 hours that I simply can't afford in order to meet all of my deliverables and my leadership capacity. So I think having that flexibility is really a big winner. And if your organisation does allow that, or at least you're comfortable having the conversation, which I would highly encourage you to do, you can typically work out a way where everyone's happy, right? And you get to meet the demands that are placed on you at home, as well as the demands that are placed on your work, and do so well. So I think there's lots of opportunities, especially these days as we've got all these wonderful tools available to us from a technology perspective, so we can have conversations like the one we're having today from all sorts of different locations. We don't have to be in the room together. And I would just encourage folks to be very transparent around what your needs are, and be clear about that, and be willing to go into bat and say, here's how I can achieve what the organisation needs of me, and here's how I'm going to manage that on the other end. So that would
Great
be mine.
advice.
Yeah.
And we've talked a bit about sort of support for individuals. Let's think about now more at an organisational industry level. This question has come through and said, what's the 3 sort of actions or initiatives we need to do to improve diversity? Now, there's an open question, and there's lots of guides and information and resources we know that are out there. But from your perspectives, keen to hear from each of you, sort of what are the starting points that people should consider?
I got an example of a very small change that we've done at RTC, and a bit of a plug is in Inland Rail. We got 47% females in the workforce. And this is something I'm very, very proud of. And in that, we've been working on building on the great work that I think ARTC as an organization has been doing continuously for over 10 years. And in that, it was about promoting workplace that embrace flexibility and workplace diversity, and offer attractive and contemporary employment conditions. And when I just joined RTC, we were reviewing our enterprise bargaining agreement. At that stage, I was not on the management side, but on the employees. And coming from a consultancy, whilst I saw, wow, there's flexible working arrangement here, it's part of that. The take up was very, very low. And when you look at that, you're saying, well, what is the current process? And the process was at the approval of a manager, which is reasonable for saying in an employment agreement. However, when I talked to various people around the office, it appears to be a bit of a barrier, because a lot of people didn't know how to start the conversation. A lot of managers didn't understand when the conversation started of what the employee was asking from them. And what we've done is a very, very subtle change. We just introduced, it might sound bureaucratic, but a form. Okay? A form that when an employee wants to approach their manager about flexible working arrangement, they put exactly 3 sentences and saying, this is what I want, this is what I offer, this is why I want it, and this is how I think that would work. And in return, the manager will need to respond and sort of saying, I think that would work, I would think that wouldn't work, and why. And by doing that, just a very, very simple change, I think it opened the door for a lot of people feeling much more comfortable to start the conversation. And we're talking about some silos within, so we'd like to have a change workplace, but there's still a lot of people that have been there for a very long time and got all those sorts of stigmas, but forcing them to justify why they're denying flexible working arrangement, and giving some exposure to our HR department into how often are people asking for that and how often we accept it, is worked very, very well. And then building on that with Inland Rail, we took the approach of having an agile workplace and looking at it as agile mindset, and coming up to COVID and seeing how pretty much overnight we need to take the whole workplace to work from home. That was extremely successful. And I think there's a huge opportunity there for a watershed moment about trust and relationship between all employees and organization on a grand scale. And particularly when you're more of a white collar type of a profession, ultimately, I don't think that our spend is a good measure of productivity. And it's really by designing the workplace, by designing the office, by designing where we do work and how we do work, it all embraces that. And I think we're going to see some great results in the next few years.
That's great. Claire, do you want to jump in next?
Sure. I guess I would absolutely echo the workplace flexibility is a key one, of course. But a couple of things. I think, look, you get what you accept, right? So if an organisation is accepting of certain behaviours, then that's what's going to continue to occur. So you need to find a way to open up to have those conversations, whether it's through training, whether it's through group discussions, whether it's through, forms even, to enable discussions and give permission. So I think that's something to think about. What is it that you're accepting today? Also, I'm a very strong believer in you get what you measure, or if you don't measure it, it's not going to improve. Whether or not you have targets is sort of irrelevant, but are you measuring things? And it's not just about the actual level of males and females and numbers in the organisation. It's, how many have you got on your interview slates? It's how many are you putting up for training, and is that relatively equal to or better than the existing diversity proportion you've got of staff? I mean, there's a whole range of different measures that can really shine a light on your performance organisationally, and then, help you understand where it's at, because that's the first thing that helps people want to make a change. So just where are you at? Do you know? And how do you keep track of that going forward? And then the other one is your staff really need to believe that your organisation has its money where its mouth is, right? So by that I mean, are you looking at your policies, putting in place audits for remuneration from a gender pay gap perspective? Are they providing equal access to benefits like parental leave? And what do those look like? So is your organisation measuring itself and moving towards, the better or best practices in those spaces? And certainly the Workplace Gender Equality Agency provides a lot of amazing tools to help any organisation along the path in that direction. So they're probably the key ones from me.
Thanks, Claire. Nat?
Yeah, from me, so I'd concur as well around the kind of future of work and ways of working, because that's going to be so fundamental moving forwards. I think there's a really key piece here around flexibility, and that is historically the assumption has been that flexibility is purely a gender diversity issue, and it's not. And I think in the modern age, with different types of relationships, different family setups, FIFO, whatever it might be, I think we need to be accepting and understanding that flexibility works for a whole range of people, not just the sort of mum with a couple of kids at home. So I think we need to be open to the conversation and really start to engage around what does that mean, and how does that kind of then translate into the workplace, the way we work, the standards we set, so on and so forth. And I think the other piece is, we've got to really enable conversations. We've talked a lot around encouraging people to talk up and speak up about their issues, but we have to create the channels for people to share their feedback, whether that's formal channels or informal channels. Sometimes organisations don't know what their problems are because no one's telling them. So, you might be doing a great job with whatever it might be today, but actually, if you do a deep dive into it, you find out that people actually aren't really comfortable. So I think my encouragement would be start the conversation, and that's right at all levels of the organisation. It's not just a senior leadership, every journey starts with one step. So if we've got more people out there that are starting the conversation at different levels of the organisation, in different teams, then that momentum will rise and we'll be able to really sort of generate a really, really positive shift for people.
Yeah, that's great. I want to draw out that amazing figure before, Elan, 47% of inland rail workforce. Now, there's a number of questions coming through around quotas. Did you achieve that through a quota, and what are people's views on quotas? And then I sort of want to tease that out further in, I guess, how do we ensure that females are not supported and promoted to the perceived maybe detriment of their male colleagues?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And no, we haven't achieved that by introducing quotas. As I said, so we build on what we think is a fairly attractive and contemporary employment condition. We build on top of that with the agile approach and mindset. And fantastic results. But if we look at the details, we're in some areas, one of them which I'm accountable for, we see a very, very similar figures to what we see with the rest of the industry. So in the engineering, we're in the low 20s, and I think the challenge for us will be to maintain the momentum moving forward to the delivery and implementation. We're very much in a planning organization at the moment. We are focusing on the developing design and engaging with the community and doing all those sorts of things that you do at the early phase of that. And in some respect, we're a delivery authority, not a rail organization in a lot of aspects. So that helped us. We also got a new and exciting project, which generally attracts people to come and join and help and make their mark. And our focus in the coming months and the coming years needs to be to retain that momentum and work collaboratively with the industry to maintain those sorts of numbers moving forward. I think I just want to add something about measures, which I think the reports that the ARA now produce is very, very good and very, very helpful. I think what's missing for me as an industry is we know, particularly as we got a retention issue, as I don't believe we attempted to do a longitudinal survey and try and map rather than at a point in time what's happening throughout the career. And I think that would really help us with some of the misunderstanding that we have of where the issues are, because we'll be able to check in on the same individuals throughout their careers and see how their perception evolve or change or doesn't, and particularly those who leave us to understand very, very well of what we've done wrong in order to make sure that we change or that it feeds into our change.
Great suggestion. Nat, keen to get your insights?
Yeah, for me, the jury's out a little bit now on quotas. I think for me, what's really important is actually that the best person gets the role. And that for me is irrelevant whether that person is male or female. I think what's important in the female space is how do we actually support our females and equip them to become the right person for the role. So when they're competing in heavily sort of male dominated fields, they're not out on a limb, they are well prepared, they're well supported, and actually are bringing an awful lot to the party. So I think that's a gap at the moment. In a lot of areas. And I think, you know, the piece around, we've touched on a bit around the metrics, and, you know, Claire talked about sort of numbers in interview panels. They're metrics that we've put in place here at Queensland Rail as well, just to try and drive that participation and try and remove some of that kind of unconscious bias. And I know some organisations, for example, even depersonalise CVs to take that unconscious bias away, and it's purely around the content rather than the predisposed sort of ideas that people might have. So I think for me, I'm a firm believer in supporting women to become the best candidate for the role.
And I would agree with Nat on that one. And it's really, how do you as well, though, get the females onto the slate in the first instance for the possibility of getting put into a role? You've got to prepare them, certainly. And if they're coming in from outside, if you're looking for them, how do you push your recruitment team to expand their search criteria? Because you're not always going to get that perfect signalling engineer or what have you that you think you might have thought historically was required for the role. So how do you get to them to look at the skill sets that are broader, that might come from someone, you know, from a teaching background or an HR background or otherwise? So can you push that envelope in the first instance to expand the candidate pool that you're looking at? And then how do you make sure, you know, or see how they perform in the process? And certainly what we saw in General Electric is once we got women onto the panel, a lot of them, you know, they had a higher success rate of actually being given the job ultimately as the best candidate, because absolutely it's very competitive. Everyone wants to do well. You don't need a poor performer on your team, right? So everyone's very conscious of that. You want the best person for the role. It was very interesting to me that once you got them on the panel, though, typically their performance was at a greater level than perhaps their representation on the panel percentage-wise was. So I think really pushing that can help. And if you do that, you don't necessarily need quotas, but how is the organisation supporting it? Do all of your employees, all of your managers, do they believe this is something that's really what they need to do and internalise themselves? Because back to probably my very first comment, it really is all about how do we each behave as individuals, and what is it that we are going to do personally to help ensure that we are creating an organisation that's very inclusive and accepting of diverse staff.
Yeah. That's great. I just checked the time. I have no idea where our hour has gone. I could talk to you three and so could the questions just keep on coming. So I'm conscious of time. We'll have to try and wrap this up. So perhaps there's a question here around we've talked about this topic for a while. Everyone's been on this diversity journey for a while. How can we speed this up a little? So perhaps your final thoughts around that and some final comments from each of you. Elan, do you want to start? Males first.
I'll start. I'll finish where I start. That we need to just think that we're going to keep everything the same and just put some measures there, and all of a sudden things miraculously will disappear. This is a long-term change. We need to want to change. We need to know how to change, and then the lagging indicator, that is those diversity figures, will follow suit. That's my personal belief and journey.
Thanks, Elan. Nat?
Yeah, so for me, I think I'd like to wrap it up with a bit of a call to actions. I think there's a couple of call outs I'd like to make. The first is, we've got Elan here as part of the panel, but equally as, this is about females and gender diversity, we need males to champion the change. So those of you on the webinar that are males, you absolutely have a role to play here. And in some ways, the role that you play is more critical than the role of female sponsors, because it's the men that can play a really big role in driving the change. My other call to action as well is to really everybody on the webinar and all of your networks and your colleagues and your friends and family. And it comes back to a point I made earlier around be the change that you want to see. So really start to get stuck into this topic, start the conversation, and, wherever you can, make sure that you're doing your bit to empower your fellow female colleagues and friends and relatives, because it's not just a workplace issue, it's a broader issue for our society. So, together we can drive that change and make this world a much fairer and more balanced place.
Thanks, Nat. Claire?
My fearless forecast is that while COVID has been terrible globally, it is going to actually hasten our progress in this space because of what we're all doing here today, and that really does allow for that workplace flexibility, which when I was looking at the research several years back, that was really the one critical factor of enabling the change that we want to see, and it enables it for everyone, and it helps change some of those traditional ways we've thought about work and what success is and how to manage it all. So I think it's going to help us fast forward this one, and I just hope that all organisations will embrace what we've experienced through this period and take the best parts out of that and continue that on.
That's great. Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you so much, Nat. Thank you so much, Elan. It's been great today. I really appreciate your time and me firing questions off at you. And thanks to all participants that joined us. And I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all of your questions, but this conversation is just about continuing the conversation. So please ask your questions, have these conversations in your workplaces, in your social circles. Really encourage you to keep on talking about these really important issues. A short feedback survey will be circulated, so I really encourage you to complete that as well. Our next major event is Ausrail. It's happening next week, and the event will be delivered online, so you get a chance to listen to more amazing industry leaders from the comfort of your home or office. And our expanded 3-day format actually provides access to more content than you've ever had before. So again, silver linings of COVID, right? But there are social events, so you can join in face-to-face physical events as well. So please register for all of these opportunities. You can find all the details on ausrail.com. But once again, thanks everyone for participating, and thanks especially to our panelists. Have a lovely afternoon and stay safe.
Thank you.